Okay, it's my very great pleasure to introduce the distinguished visitor, Professor Samantha Brennan. She is the Dean of the College of Arts at the University of Guelph. Before that, she was Professor of Women's Studies here at Western, and before that, she was Chair of the Department of Philosophy here at Western. She got her PhD at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and working farther backwards in time, did her undergraduate at Dalhousie. Her Wikipedia entry is really good. It says she is a British-born academic.
I didn't write it.
But, of course, grew up in the Maritimes. So, among other achievements, she's one of the founding editors of the Feminist Philosopher Quarterly, the new journal, and doing very well. She, together with Tracy Isaacs, is a very, very prolific blogger. Many of you will have are already readers of Fit as a Feminist Issue, and many of the blog entries there got reworked into an amazingly best-selling book, Fit at Midlife, which actually sold out 2 printings in 1 month. I was at the book at the book launch last year. Was standing room only, so we're coming up on 1 year of Fit at Midlife. One of the other interesting things is that while she was chair of philosophy at Western, she was instrumental in founding the Rotman Institute for Philosophy. And it's the Rotman Institute of Philosophy which is hosting this series in happiness and well-being. And I'm very pleased that Samantha is here to open the conference with her talk on 5 questions about women and well-being. So please join me in welcoming.
This is my daughter here who's providing technical support. So she's better at that than I am. So I want to start by first talking about what we mean by well-being and what this sort of introduction to the series before I start talking about my topic in particular. So when we use language that's about well-being, we have usually a few purposes. As philosophers, we have a few purposes in mind. Is that going to work now? There we go.
Yes.
Yeah. So we talk about it in terms of your life going well. When I ask about well-being, I'm asking kind of how's your life going? How are you doing? We use language like, now we have all sorts of things happening. Let me see. There we go. Thanks, Val. Happiness, satisfaction, pleasure. We care about our own well-being, but we also hope that we care about the well-being of others. So when we think about, how I want my life to go, I think about the subject of well-being. I need to have an idea of what it would be for my life to go well. What would count as my life going well? What would it? We have an idea of what it's like for your life to go badly. I think probably we can all think about ways it could go badly. But when we think about what it would be for it to go well, we may have different ideas in mind. So philosophers are interested and have been since the beginning of philosophy in this question about what is it for our life to go well? What is it to lead a good life? It's the subject of both what I call self-concern, but also other concern. We're also worried about how other people's lives goes. And it matters because you set out to plan your own life. So you make a plan for your life, you want your life to go well, and you kind of have to have an idea of what it is you're aiming for in order to have a plan and see whether or not you're being successful. We also set out to help those around us thrive. And on a really big scale, we care about how social policy is doing, and we care about, for example, aid programs to other countries. We need a measure of if they're successful. Often we say we want an improvement in well-being. What does that mean? And if you're in an aid program, how do you measure it? We shouldn't get too caught up in the how we measure it question, because sometimes there are things we can measure that aren't the things we care about. and we should, as philosophers, we want to think separately about what we care about, and that isn't always the thing that we want to measure. Now, I'm going to talk for today, and probably some of the other lectures will as well, as if these notions were all the same notion. So when we're concerned about my well-being, and I'm concerned about your well-being, and I'm concerned about the well-being of society as a whole, I'm concerned about one thing. But it may be, as we think about this, that you want those notions to come apart. And I'm not going to talk about that today, but I'm going to flag that for you as a thing to think about as you go through the series, that it may be when I care about others, I have a more narrow or a more limited scope of concern when it comes to other people. When I care about my well-being, it may be a fairly robust notion. When I care about the well-being of others, it may be that I have something narrower in mind than the big notion of well-being. But for today, we're going to assume that we're talking about the big notion, and it's the same across those different groups. Me, those close to me, friends and family, distant others, society as a large, all one group. We're going to run together kind of prudential concern, which is concern for my well-being, with altruistic concern, which is concern for the well-being of others. But we're going to assume that when we're talking about it, we're concerned about the same thing for other people as we are for ourselves. Feminists care about well-being from a particular angle. Feminists want to make claims about how well women's lives are going, how well men's lives are going. And to do that, if you're a feminist, you need a view about this topic I just talked about, the philosophers care about, which is what is it for life to go well? So if feminists make claims, we do make claims, about women's lives, conditions under which women thrive and conditions under which women suffer, then we have to have a notion about what it is for a life to go well and what it is for a person to thrive, what it is for a person to not thrive and suffer. So feminists have an interest in having a view of well-being. Even though often I think as feminists we think we don't. We often think we don't want to tell others how to live their life. We say things, I think, that on reflection maybe we don't want to commit to. We say things like, as feminists, we don't want to tell other people how they ought to live their lives, or we don't want to have a view about this. I think that's a mistake. I think we do want to have a view about it, and we ought to have a view about it, and we can have good views about it. And we have, I think, despite saying we don't want to tell other people how to live their lives, and despite sometimes saying we don't have a view about well-being, I think when you read feminist political work, there is at root a notion of well-being there. I've got an example there, a very old book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. And if you read that book, there is a notion of what it is to flourish that's in that's part of that story. So when you read books, feminist books on self-help, on issues of weight or food or self-esteem, body image, body positivity, it's pretty clear that feminists have an idea of what it is to have a good life, or at least what some of the components of the good life are, and they're part of our feminism. So in a way, this talk is a series of questions about women and well-being. And when I'm teaching graduate students, I often have throwaway topics. This is kind of like a series of throwaway topics that I say, somebody, not me, ought to write a dissertation about this. So I often view my job in the classroom, in the graduate classroom, as throwing out possible projects that I want to supervise. This is a series of possible projects that I would love to supervise. This is not my work. This is work that I'm interested in, work that my work connects to. You'll see in ways in which my work connects to these questions. But it's work that other people ought to do, and I would love to supervise their dissertations. It's my favorite thing to do as a professor in a classroom. So I'm going to ask, first of all, should we have, when it comes to men and women, one standard of well-being or two? You'll see why that's a question that comes up. What would a feminist theory of well-being look like? Do women and men, who has the better lives? When women aren't happy with their lives, but the circumstances are unjust, does that tell us something about well-being? And then I want to talk a little bit about some inequalities that exist and how we ought to think about them. I'm going to actually talk about the play gap, not the pay gap. So here's the first question, which we won't spend a lot of time on because I think there's an answer, and the answer is no. But Julie Annis raises the question of whether or not we should have two norms or one. Because she's interested in this. She comes at the question of well-being from the perspective, she's an Aristotelian, and looks at what is good for a person, and then notes that men and women lead very different lives. So maybe, she thinks, because one of the things is if you want one notion of well-being, and then you start looking around the world, and then you start looking through time, and you don't want to say that the only people who had good lives are people living in Canada, the United States, and Northern Europe in the year 20, you don't want that to be the answer to your question of who has a good life. You want to say there were good lives in the past, and you want to say there's good lives around the globe. So where do we set the bar, and do we have one standard or many standards? And once we have many standards, one obvious place is, since gender plays such a big role in dividing up the way we live our lives, maybe gender is a category we look at when we look at patterns. So when you look at patterns of good lives, the variety of lives that you might think are good lives, maybe gender is a relevant factor. Now, I think I want to reject that claim. You may want to hang on to it, and we can talk about that. And I want to reject it because I don't think gender is that significant. I think the goods of a good life are good for both men and women. I think we make too much of gender as a society. We could do with making less of it. So I don't think gender is as significant as we might think, and I don't think it's as significant for well-being, but some people do. So when you're thinking about it, think about how relative do you want your notion of well-being to be. So one possibility is that it's relative in various ways, and one way that people have suggested it might be relative is relative to whether you're a man or a woman. So here's the first, if you're coming to all of these lectures on well-being, this is a theory that you'll come up against probably in each one of the lectures. And it's it's a simple theory at its heart, but with lots of variations. And the theory is, it's a desire theory of the good, or a preference theory of the good. We're going to talk about them as if they're the same. What makes my life go well? Getting the things that I want. And note, if we do it that way, then we don't have to worry about having 37 different theories for all the different kinds of lives people could have. Because we can look back in the past, look across time and place, and say that what matters is people getting the life that they want, getting the things that they want, and we don't need 37 different accounts of well-being. We can have one, and that one is going to say that what's good is wanting a thing and getting that thing. The combination, and some people add wanting it, getting it, and the state of knowing that you've got it. Because philosophers like to be picky about these kind of details. So they build in the idea that there's the mental state that comes with knowing that you've gotten the thing. Because we can imagine stories where you want a thing and you get a thing, but you don't know that you've gotten the thing, but we don't think that's quite as good for you. So Mill actually builds in this idea of this mental state part where you want a thing and you get it, and what's good is the mental state of getting the thing that you want. We're not going to worry too much about all of this. Theory comes in many, many, many versions. But its heart is the simple idea that what's good, it's a very liberal idea, right? It's what's good for you. You can think about what things you want in your life. So just think for yourself about the kinds of things you would like in your life. And then when I ask if your life is going well, what I want to know is, are you getting the things that you want? Because we could want different things. So it's got two big advantages. One big advantage, you don't need 37 accounts, just one. Second big advantage, you don't need to ask me ever why I should care about it. Like the motivational time, I automatically care about my well-being because it's defined in terms of getting something that I want. So I already want it. Some accounts of well-being might be a bit more distant from me. They might be harder to explain why I would care about them. This just builds why I care about it right in. You don't need to give me an argument about it. It's defined in terms of getting something that I want. So when we want to know whether or not women are leading good lives, we say, women want things in their lives. Are they getting the things that they want in their lives? Are we happy with the things that that we've brought into our lives, the things we've got? Now, I said it had two big advantages. It also has a whole bunch of disadvantages as a theory. And I'm only going to really focus on one of those disadvantages. But I'm going to tell you some of the others, just because I like to share the things that are wrong with this theory that I find attractive but see the problems with. What if I want something really bad? What if I want the suffering of others? What if the thing that would make me happy is other people suffering? Is it really an improvement in my well-being if I get that? Now, you might say it's not a good thing overall, because some people suffer, and it's just your happiness. But I don't think my happiness should enter into it at all in that case. Imagine if a woman is taken into police custody, and while she's there, nude photos of her are taken and they're distributed without her knowledge to other police officers, and they're shared, right? Is it getting better and better as more people who want to see those pictures? Or worse and worse? I mean, my intuition is it's getting worse and worse, not better and better. But it should be an increase in well-being. It should be like, we'll just send it to more cops. It'll be even better. No, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's improving well-being. But if well-being is a good thing, it would seem that there should be some number that's going to outweigh her misery if she found out. And I don't even want to say that it improves their well-being. I don't think that people who want bad things for others are better off when they get them. So it turns out I'm not that much of a liberal after all. I mean, I was a liberal, but I thought everybody wanted good things. But now when some people want bad things, I'm not so sure that them getting them is an improvement in their well-being. I know it's not a good thing overall, but I also am not even sure it's good for them. If you want to see an animal suffer and you torture an animal and watch it suffer, are you better off? I'm not convinced, so I worry about that. I also worry sometimes it gets the direction the wrong way. Like, something is good because I want it, but if I'm 20 years old or 18 years old and wondering what I should want in my life, it's no good answer to say to me, well, what's good for you is getting the things that you want. And I say, yeah, I know, but what should I want? What are the good things in the world? Show me the good things and I can want them, but I don't know what's good. And you say, well, what's good is getting the things that you want, and you haven't answered my question. Because I actually think the direction sometimes goes the other way. I should want something because it's good. Think about being a better person. Think about beautiful music. Think about great art. You want to want those things because they're good. And sometimes that involves some education and moving a bit of distance. So I think sometimes education is another one. I think sometimes it gets the direction the wrong way. It also does a bit, so philosopher Ronald Dworkin thinks it also does a bit of double counting sometimes. What does that mean? Well, I want what's good for me, But suppose I also want what's good for Sarah. And so Dworkin imagines a society of Sarah lovers, where each person doesn't want what's good, they want what's good for Sarah. So you put all those preferences into a pot, and you've counted what's good for Sarah hundreds of times. And he thinks that can't be right.
Nice to be Sarah.
It's got to be. So that's his example. And so you can think about the double counting worry as also leaking into this feminist worry. Because what if women want what's good for ourselves, but those of us in relationships with men also want what's good for them? And what if they want what's good for them but don't want what's good for us? Just imagine. Or they don't want what's good for us as much as we want what's good for them. And then you put all those preferences into a pot, and all of a sudden you've got way more preferences for men than you do for women. So there's some worries here that I think that are connected to feminist worries about this way of thinking about well-being. Also, what we want isn't neutral. So I'm raised in a society in which certain of my preferences are shaped by gender. And while some of those I think are not so bad, like my caring about shoes or, some of them just seem like fun and not harmful. Others of them might be harmful. And so I might want things that really aren't that good for me. And that's the one I want to talk about a little bit more in detail. So Thomas Hill, I always call it Thomas Hill's Differential Wife. And then I have to point out that Thomas Hill is in fact not married to a differential wife. It's Thomas Hill's example of the differential wife. So the differential wife is somebody who wants what's good for herself, but mostly want what's good for him, for the husband. And again, if we're setting out on a preference satisfaction account of well-being, then we have to make her happy, we have to make him happy, and we have to worry about the kinds of things that she wants if she doesn't really have enough self-respect, right? She doesn't care enough about what's good for her. Her strong preferences are about what's good for him. So you've probably heard this problem in a few different ways. We can call them adaptive preferences. We can call them, some feminists call them deformed desires. I don't quite like that language, but other people like the language of deformed desires. The problem with sour grapes, where the fox can't get the grapes right and doesn't want the grapes anyway. They're probably sour. So you shape your preferences to what's available to you. And it's natural to shape your preferences to what's available and not be miserable all the time, wanting things you can't have. My favorite example comes from me as an undergrad, where I thought for a while that what I really wanted was to be a philosopher's girlfriend. And I was a smart kid, and after a while it dawned on me, no, actually, you idiot, you don't want to be a philosopher's girlfriend. You want to be a philosopher. Because when I imagined being a philosopher's girlfriend, what I imagined was not like a steamy romantic relationship. What I imagined was staying up all night arguing and talking. And I realized that's actually what you want. You don't want to be a philosopher's girlfriend, you want to be a philosopher. And so that's, you may, if I thought I could only be a philosopher's girlfriend and I couldn't be a philosopher, that's, that, you can see how you come to have that desire. Women who want to be nurses, some women who are nurses want to be nurses. But some women who want to be nurses really want to be doctors, but can't imagine being doctors. Right? So it's our desires, what we want is affected by what's available, and that is a bad thing on this theory. You can see how this theory of well-being ends up having some conservative implications if in terms of what's good for you is getting what you want, but what you want is shaped by the world around you. The world around you has these gender roles, and so you only want the things that you think you can have. and that's shaped by what you think your options are. Now, some desires that are shaped by the world are okay. So the tricky part here with this worry is not having it go too far over everything we want. I want the lives of my children to go well. Like, your life should go well. And that might be a little bit, some of that might be, and maybe, you might think some of that socialized in my role as a mother. No, it's also just something I want. It's not irrational also to say women care too much about our appearances, etc. Blah blah blah. That's not irrational in a word that rewards women for caring about their appearance. It's not just socialization. It's also just smart, rational thinking. If I think I'm in a world in which my teaching evaluations will go up, if I'm better looking, it's not crazy to think about, brushing my hair before class or something. I don't go too wild, but you know what I mean. I'm a philosopher. Brushing my hair is about as good as it gets. But so some of our desires that are shaped by the world are okay. Other ones we're going to worry about, and we're going to have to think about which ones are okay and which ones aren't. But the upshot of all these worries leads some feminists to reject the desire theory of well-being. You can try fixing the desire theory of well-being. You can say it's not what you want, it's what you would want if you had full information. It's what you would want if you had full information and you were perfectly rational. So what's good for me is not what I want. It's what some better, smarter version of me with more information would want. Notice then, though, that I lose the motivational tie, because why do I care about what she wants? Like fancy pants, smart aleck Herb, I want all sorts of things that I actually don't care about. You can imagine, the more educated, more full information person wanting all sorts of things that I currently couldn't care about. And it's hard to see how I start caring. So you can think about ways you could work with that desire theory to make it, to address some of those problems. It's going to deal with maybe it'll deal with the people who want bad things. Maybe it'll deal with the problem of having it shaped too much by the world around you. So we give you full information, and we say what's good for you is what you would want if you were really smart and full information. And maybe if we want to get really wild, we say, and if you were a good person, because we just throw the separation of ethics out the door and we just, But once you've gone that far, I think you've really just gone to an objective theory of well-being. Once you make the person, which is to say it's separate from what it is you want. Some things are good, and you can make your life happy. You have well-being by training your desires to map onto the things that are good. So Martha Nussbaum does that. Kimberly Urako does that. She's a perfectionist who has certain ways of being in the world that she thinks are ways we ought to want, and kind of describes what those things are. And then to be happy in life, you do best if you can get your desires to attach to things that are good. Because there are good things, and you're happiest if you want them, but they're separate. They're not made good by you wanting them. Education might be a good example of something like that you might easily see. Susan Babbitt, someone else, I said other feminists argue for revising the preference theory of the good, but at this point, I think the kind of revisions that are necessary to the desire theory are big enough that you kind of end up not far off the people who have an objective theory of the good that is separate from our want. Things are good separate from our wanting it. Things in the world are good, and we lead our best lives when we come to want those things. Okay. So all of this is just to say, I think that feminists need a theory of well-being. we're gone part of the way there. This is the part where you graduate students, I would say, here's my abstract for your dissertation. You should work on connecting this part of feminist moral philosophy with the community, which has developed kind of standards of what we think are a good life. And probably filling in what people who have objective theories of the good often call those things objective list theories. And you can look to the feminist community to think about what ought to go on that list. What are the components of having a good life? Often feminists want to say that good, satisfying relationships are an important element of leading a good life. You know, over here you're going to want to say, so does that mean monks can, can someone who's like a hermit could never have a good life? Can a hermit never? So we'll have questions about the feminist theory of well-being, but we want to say that it needs developing. So we're turning now to the do women lead worse lives than men question. And I've got 2 reading recommendations on the men lead worse lives than women's side, and on the women lead worse lives than men's side. And I'll tell you a little bit about their views. So Christine Overall's book, Aging, Death, and Human Longevity, is about women leading long, and she thinks, mostly miserable lives. So we have kind of not much well-being, but it goes on for a long time. Right? And she's not sure that's a virtue, that it goes on for a long time. Like, we live longer than men, but we're more likely to live lives of poverty, and those extra years of life aren't necessarily always healthy years. So we're sort of, my elderly cat just died this week, and I think it was like, she was like this super strong old lady cat. And I kind of imagined her last patch of life like the Christine Overall story about the, just keep on going. But there's not much good there. She would just look up occasionally and go eat a bite of food, then go back to sleep. David Benatar's book, The Second Sexism, got a lot of press because he argues that men lead lives that are worse than women. We'll look at what some of those things are, but the first one we're going to notice is that men lead shorter lives than women, and he thinks this is a travesty, and we've ignored this, and moral philosophers ought to pay a lot more attention to the fact that men, on average, lead shorter lives than women, and so there's a well-being gap, he thinks, between men and women, because men have shorter lives. Now, it's complicated because men have ages at which they're more likely to die. If you're in the room and you're a man and you've made it into your 70s, then you'll probably live as long as women your age. If you've survived kind of the heart attack gulf, once you get past that, it's pretty good going. And if you didn't kill yourself doing something risky and stupid, in your late teens, early 20s. So men's average lifespan is lower it's not just generally that men die earlier than women. Men dying too, there's ages of which are riskier than others. And once you make it past those risky ages, you actually do as well as women in a comparable group. So men were, you can just breathe a sigh of relief if you're through that. So let's think about the do men lead worse lives than women question. And in some ways, feminist theories of well-being think that men do. There's room there for that view. Why? Feminist theories of well-being put relationships front and center, and those are goods that women have more access to. Men, I'm sad to say, often aren't very good at friendship, often don't have friends, often don't have that much time with their family. And from the point of view of things that feminists have thought were important to the good life, they don't get as much of that stuff as women do. I had male colleagues who I thought were good friends, and one was having a baby, and so couldn't come into work, so I rushed to tell the other, thinking that he would be keen to know. And he said, good God, I didn't even know he was married. Like, wow, like, I thought you were best friends. Oh, we're close. So that's when I realized that male friendship had a different flavor than female friendship. I wouldn't know women for like a few minutes, and I would know that. Like, that would be just, so men have fewer friends, they spend less time with their family, less time with their elderly relatives. And feminists have often thought about this in terms of a burden that women bear, but we also think about it as the thing that makes our life go well. And that's not something men have access to, or men have less access to it. So it's a complicated question from a feminist point of view, this do men have worse lives than women question. Here's some more ways men's lives are worse, not to make you feel bad, men in the audience. So it's life expectancy, health, you're more prone to alcoholism and drug abuse, you're more vulnerable to violence, your suicide rates are higher, you're more likely to be in jail, you're more likely to be homeless, and not as likely to make it through school. That doesn't look it's not very promising, right? Yet in spite of that, you get paid more. Canada has a pretty big gender gap in pay. The stats, this stuff is just, you can just look at StatsCan for this. This is easy to find. It's gloomy. It doesn't change. I keep looking and thinking it's going to get better. Like, women acquire more work having a husband. It doesn't help. It's not just that it doesn't help, they actually make more work. And the really serious stuff of sexual assault, sexual harassment. So there are ways in which men's lives are worse than women, and ways in which women's lives are worse than men. And even on a feminist theory of well-being, there are things to lament about the way men's lives are structured. Philosophers love this question, and I want you to think about it, which is if you have the choice of extra years, so some people want to say what matters is well-being. When we care about well-being, what we care about is having a good average over a lifespan. What if the extra years drag down the average? And they will, right? They will. So, do we care about higher total, or do we care about higher average? Like, if you had a choice of 20 years extra at the end of your life, so suppose you make it to 90, and then we're now at a stage where you live to 110, but it's going to be, a life barely worth living, say. My thesis supervisor's example of a life barely worth living was pounding rocks, eating gruel, and listening to Barry Manilow records. But whatever version of that works for you, think about that and ask whether or not is that an addition worth wanting. So you start to see there's something to the Christine overall point of view, that the extra years, if they're lived in poverty, as they are for many women, and if they're lived in ill health, you can't say, oh, you live longer than men, you're better off, because it depends by what measure you care about well-being. Do you care about the total? And if you care about the total, there's got to be a point at which you think adding on, like getting really close to the barely worth living, adding on lots of that doesn't do any good at all. And you might think is in fact making things worse. And if you think there's a point at which it's making things worse, you think the average view has some appeal, because the way it's making it worse is it's dragging down the average. We've already said it was worth living, right? It's not so bad that it would be rational to end it. It's barely worth living. So think about the philosophers love that question, and it's worth thinking about because it shows that I think we have both intuitions on the go, both that we think that what matters is the total, but we also like a high average, and those views, you can't have both those views. You have to pick. So let me say a little bit about other kinds of inequalities. This is the one I've been working on lately with my colleague Tracy Isaacs, who I wrote the Citizen Feminist Issue blog with, and who we wrote a book with. We've become thinking more lately about this in particular inequality, which is the play gap between men and women, and the gap in physical activity between men and women, and boys and girls. And it's an interesting one. because it occurs throughout the lifespan. I've got it here. Right, starts in early childhood. And it matters not just because access to play is a good thing, or access to physical activity is a good thing. It matters because it has other implications. People who are successful in sports or play sports are more likely to be successful in other areas of life. People who are physically active have other kinds of advantages. Women who are physically active have certain kinds of gains in body image and self-esteem, but also in a kind of autonomy and agency that aren't there if you're not physically active. So it's not just the physical activity, it's all the other stuff that goes along with it that matters. Starts in childhood and starts really young. I'm always surprised at how young, like when you put, you can put little movement monitors, like little Fitbits on small children. And it starts young, that boys move more than girls. Theories about why that's so. Parents worry, and we have something that we call protection paradox, where we worry about our kids so much they move less. It's a paradox because they're worse off as a result of our worrying. Like we don't let them walk to school, and then, or that these days kids don't have sort of basic bodily awareness for movement, kind of movement competency. They're missing out on some of that stuff. And we do it because we're worried about them. And we worry more about girls than we do about boys. So that's one explanation for why this gap in inactivity starts really young. Like you'll stop if you can put people in a room with what they think is a boy baby crawling around, and then the boy baby gets to do far more dangerous things than if you put a pink onesie on the same baby. All of a sudden, oh my God, she's gonna fall, she's gonna get hurt. All right. Increases in preteen and early teen years. And then opposite sex couples form families, gender division of work in the home, and there's another gap. And those women, by that point, don't go back tend not to go back to physical activity. So, and it matters, as I said, not just for the health implications of not enough physical activity, but it matters because it has all sorts of other implications and connections to the way we live our lives. And there's all sorts of things that we lose out on as a result. And it's an interesting one because I think people are surprised by it, and surprised by it. Lots of places. I'm trying to think. Is there? I don't think there is. I've looked at data from around the world. I don't think I found a country yet that doesn't have that for men and women. And so when we say what could women achieve in sports, we have no idea. We just do not know. Because we don't have groups of women who were raised without this kind of, at some level, some restrictions on our movement. We don't know. So I think it's an interesting, hard one. We also, feminists also have, the other place feminist well-being enters in that has to do with my work, has to do with my work about death. And feminist well-being, so we often think about death in terms of someone that takes something away. There's Death the Reaper. This is a little mouse reaper. And the mouse reaper is going to take something away from us. And here's my favorite thing that Death the Reaper could take away. For your 40th birthday, happy 40th, I'll take the muscle tone in your upper arms, the girlish timbre of your voice, your amazing tolerance for caffeine, your ability to digest French fries. The rest of you can stay. So death is kind of gradually taking away things. Like death just comes on your 40th and takes some stuff, but will come later for the whole rest of it. And what you realize when you start thinking that way is that this is the view that death, when it's bad, is bad because it takes things away. It deprives you of things. And so you need a view about what kinds of things are good in order to think about what are the things that death takes away. And so feminists who write about death are interested, that's where I first got interested in this question about well-being. Because feminists who write about death are interested in what are the goods in life that death robs us of. And feminists have kind of thought about a little bit differently about what a good life is and what death takes away. So, for example, with Francis Cam here, if what's having a good life is having a good character, then death doesn't really take that away in quite the same way that it takes away future pleasurable experiences. Having a good character and attaining wisdom are among the most important of life's goods, and they're not so threatened by death. Like, it's not like having more of them would make me have a better character. They don't add in quite the same way. We think things like happiness, there's no reason not to want more. If happiness is the only good, more is always better. So death will always be bad as long as it's what's taken away is happiness. But I don't think happiness is really the best thing, is the good of life. I think the good of life are deeper, and things like character and wisdom. I mean, character and wisdom are kind of more resilient, what I call the resilient goods. They're not goods that are threatened by death. You don't think, if someone had a trip planned next week and then they die, you think, oh my God, they missed out on that experience. But if they were just in the world being a good person, you don't think, oh, they didn't get another good week of being a good person. It's not the same kind of threat. And so, and if these are more important, then death isn't as bad as we might have thought. So death takes away goods. Philosopher Margaret Walker, feminist philosopher, thinks the more resilient goods are those associated with being rather than doing. So she's focused on the kinds of goods that are complete in themselves, so the appreciation of great art, the feeling comfort in the natural world. So you're on top of a mountain, and you have a beautiful view. We don't really think it matters how long you're there. Like, it's not that a 5-hour experience of standing on top of that mountain and looking out is better than 1 hour or 10 minutes. Right? We think the experience is complete in and of itself. It doesn't need more. And so the really valuable things in life, think a number of feminists writing about death, aren't things that are so threatened by death. They're things that are good in and of themselves. So those are the kind of the two areas that I work on that are connected with well-being. That is, feminist thoughts about death and women's access to the goods of physical fitness. I still think feminists have a lot of work to do when it comes to developing a feminist theory of well-being. And some of the arguments, I think either well-being is the kind of goods of character and so on that we talked about at the end. Or if it's something else, maybe it's not the thing that matters the most. And maybe we don't want to think in terms of women's inequality necessarily in terms of well-being. That there may be, I think, that the gendered, sort of the unjust system of gender roles that we live in hurts both men and women. It's good for no one. I don't think anyone benefits. So I don't think the best arguments against it are ones that say women are worse off than men necessarily, because there are ways that it makes men worse off too. Because I agree with the feminist point that the goods of relationship are among the most important in life, and the way we structure our society, men have less access to those goods, and that matters. Thank you very much. Time for questions.
So we have time for questions. Any questions for Samantha?
Oh, come on. I gave you lots of things to think about, lots of dissertations to write. Who's going for the long, low-level life versus the short life of really good, Yeah?
Hi. I was wondering if you have any commentary on Dr. Saleman's work on well-being?
I don't. He's the optimism person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like the forefather of positive psychology, so he's
Yeah.
this whole
Yeah.
looking at what's right with life as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to what's wrong. And so what makes it good life?
Right. I looked at some of his work when I was starting my doctoral dissertation. He's been around for a while, and I was interested in his work on happiness and perception. So as it turns out, the only people who are have a realistic view of their own life are depressed people. The rest of us happy people suffer from various delusions. Right. So you might think, right. So what the you're happy. You're having your. We all think we're better than average driver. Everybody thinks we're better than average driver.
Some of us are right.
Some of you, yeah. Right. So that's one of the things I was interested in, and the way to which, if something bad happens, it was chance. And something good happens, it was personal responsibility. And we're all like that. We all tell stories like that. We all, if you say, where are you going to be in 5 years? This is so sad. Almost everybody except the depressed people are overstate where they're going to be in 5 years. We're like we're hopeless optimists. And it turns out to be a very good way to function in the world. It turns out to have it's got a useful purpose. It makes us make better choices for ourselves. We're more likely to do good for others when we're feeling that way, but there's all sorts of reasons for it. So I was interested in it for that kind of stuff. For I was thinking that I was looking at it originally as an argument against kind of maximizing consequentialism. So I think we make lousy consequentialists. I was looking at why we make lousy consequentialists. And one of the things is I think that we aren't very good at attributing our causal role in things. And that's what I was interested in. That we all, yeah.
It seems to me that you started out using the word happiness, then there was this switch to the word well-being.
Yeah.
How you're equating those two and the differentiation.
Yeah, so there's lots of different theories of well-being, and some of them are going to be very simple, and they're just going to be equivalent to the story about human happiness. Others of them, once you get into a list of objective goods, then it's not going to be so easy to think about those as they're not just happiness. Happiness might be one of the goods, but it's not really the other. So among philosophers, we tend to use well-being as the general term. I think we use it as kind of the overall term, and then there are different theories. And on some of those theories, happiness is the way to talk, and some people will, if that's your view, that well-being is just happiness, you'll use those words interchangeably. I try not to use them interchangeably, because I think there's more to well-being than just happiness, but it's part of the story.
Question? No. There's another question here.
Yeah.
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
One is, where does religion, spirituality, and consciousness fit into this whole well-being, and what is the difference between everyday life and what is seen as good and bad for you versus spiritually religious or consciousness?
So I'm not sure how religion is going to fit in different places for different people and with your belief system. It's going to be part of your story about the kinds of things that add value to your life. We can look at literature about, there's research on, are religious people happier than non-religious people? I think that's kind of beside, since I don't think the whole story of well-being is about happiness, that's kind of neither here nor there. For me, it's part of the story, but not a very interesting part. I think for lots of people, it's the place where we take seriously these questions of the good life. Like I think for lots of us, if you're not a professional philosopher, you're probably not thinking about what's a good life and how should I live my life while you're shopping at the mall, right? But for lots of us, you're thinking about that while you're in church, right? Because for many people, that is a place where you ask serious questions. And this might be one of those serious questions. So I think of religion as kind of philosophy is one home for these questions, and religion is another home for these questions. But I think it's the same question. And you're going to look different places for the answers. But.
So my second question is, as you're talking about life and if you overall or average have a good life, say you don't have a good life and later on in life your life is good, does that affect how your life is overall?
Right. So you should, you're a philosopher sneaking in, because there's some literature on how to think about where you want the happiness to be. So if I have a choice right now, a total view, so I've got a total amount of happiness in my life, and I've got some unhappiness and I've got some happiness. Where am I going to stick the unhappiness in my life? Behind me. It's going to be in the past. I'm going to throw all the unhappiness in the past, and I'm going to throw all of the happiness ahead of me. Right? If I've got a choice now, so I might think now it makes a difference, not just what the total is, but kind of from a located in time person. It kind of matters to me when it occurs. And lots of us, even if we take ourselves out of the story, if we could tell different stories about our lives, lots of us like the story that starts out, you were miserable in high school. Nobody loved you in high school. You were a high school nerd and you were all alone. And you had no friends. But then you went to university and you got beautiful and popular and smart and had lots more friends. And you had a satisfying marriage and some children and wrote some books, whatever your version of this is. And it gets better and better and better and better and better, and then you die. Same total. We could have, you were really popular in high school, everybody loved you, you were beautiful, and it was great, but then things went downhill. And things started to go downhill, your wife dies, your cat dies, things are getting worse. Same total. I think we all prefer the getting better and better and better story. So we don't just care about the total, and we don't just care about the average. I think we also care about patterns. And nobody likes I think authors like David Sedaris are good people to read because they're leading really happy lives now. And he had an awful life in his childhood. But I think those awful childhood memoirs, we like them because they fit that story, they fit that pattern. Miserable, 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 getting better and better and better, and really happy now. And that's a pattern that we have a preference for. Now, I don't know, is it rational to have that preference? I don't know, but it's one we have. We prefer, good things in the future, bad things in the past. Yeah. Sorry, we're both calling.
That's all right. Yeah, you're in charge.
I'm not allowed to be in charge.
Yes, you. Yes.
Like nowadays with all the new age philosophies and things that are happening, everything's becoming very, very individual. Like everything seems to be very relative to almost like every different individual have a different definition of what well-being is, how does it work, what happiness and stuff, but it's becoming very relative. So my question is here, how does that work with coming up with some sort of a theory that is kind of more general when the whole trend is becoming more you and you and you and you and
Yeah, so one way is to go the way I suggested at the beginning, which is to think about the desire theory. Think about each person thinks about what they want, they make a plan. It's like Margaret Walker calls it the career self. You kind of set out a schedule for yourself. Because you think at 25 I should do this, at 30 I should do this, you make a plan for your life. And then reaching those milestones or getting those goods is the thing that makes you have a good life. That's one way to go. I don't think it's the right way to go, but it's one way to go. I think we can also think about goods. So Martha Nussbaum's list of goods, they're meant to be ones that everybody does well when we have them. So goods of family and relationships, goods of Martha Nussbaum, a bunch of men in philosophy have produced objective lists, and they have not had physical pleasure and sex on the list, which always amuses me. But she actually has that on the list. But she's got a bunch of things that she thinks are elements of a good life. So education, art, dance, And and those might be, you might have different ways of realizing it. There may be different ways we have of taking that onto our life. But she's got a list of things that she thinks we can realize in different ways to different degrees, but they're good for everybody. Or you can go in that, in the desire theory. What you're not going to be able to do is rely on kind of traditional roles, because we're not a society that has traditional roles anymore. We're not, in which everybody has to do this. We now, joke at, not that long ago when you thought, somebody who wasn't, somebody was talking the other day about getting married at 31 and her family thinking that she was like an old maid. They were all feeling sorry for her for getting married at 31. And, we don't think that's probably, we've moved on from that now. There's another hand back there.
Yep.
Yeah.
This one first, then you. You're the
You're in
front
charge.
guy.
It sort of relates. I just wasn't clear, on your position on objective good, whether or not you accept that they exist.
So I'm a philosopher, and that means I don't have, if you ask me what I'm certain of in the world, there's going to be a very short list of things about which I'm certain. This is thinking about hard things and not having settled views is kind of my life.
Just how much your theory didn't realize.
So I am more likely to think that there are things in the world that are good, and they're good separate from us wanting them. And so that means that I'm committed to there being goods that are good for us, whether or not they bring us pleasure and whether or not we want them. And I suppose if you kind of pushed and poked and prodded, I would admit that I think there are objective goods as well.
Really?
I'm not certain I'm there yet. I'm not sure I'm there ready to be penned into that corner, but that's kind of if you had to pick a direction in which I lean,
Okay.
that's the direction in which I lean.
So you mentioned that women who are active have higher self-esteem.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I wanted you to speak to other factors or variables that the research shows add to women's sense of self.
Yeah.
Because I find that oftentimes women really struggle with self-esteem.
Sure.
Still.
Yeah. So you're interested in other kinds of things that make a difference?
Yeah, other components or things that women can do to boost their self-esteem.
I've only, the one I've thought about and written about is physical activity. I suspect that's got, I think, there's probably other things that have some of those elements. My daughter Mallory is here, she'll put singing in a choir on that list. But I think singing in a choir has similar things to sport and physical activity, and its group coordination. It's got some of that, some of the elements that that physical activity has. I'm not sure, other than they say that the physical activity is the one that I thought of. I think,
I was listening today on CBC, and I don't know whether this would make a difference or not, but just a different perspective altogether on life and those that face death. And one being that he thought he was going to die, and another one who almost lost a child. And just their way of thinking is they don't have that perspective of, I need to have this well-being in their life. What they're thinking is, we're all going to die. And we don't know when that is, and that can be taken from us at any minute and change our lives completely.
Sure.
So they had just a different perspective, and I maybe didn't quite get it, but it wasn't this perspective. It was different in that it's not that, oh, I live every day, every moment. It was like they knew death was going to happen, they had faced it, and they looked at life differently, and just the happiness they had from that. And the happiness of feeling that they are going to die, and they weren't afraid of it. So I don't know whether you've got something to add to that. I maybe didn't quite get it all the way, with my thinking of the way they were saying it. But it does, and I have faced death with a granddaughter and lost her. And it has changed my way of thinking.
Sure. Yeah. I think we all do well. I mean, this is for the philosophers in the room, this is something we all think you do well to think about death and realize that we're all going to die. It's not something you should not say. It's something you should think about. Read the Stoics if you're interested in sort of literature on facing death and how that improves your well-being. There's actually literature on planning for your death is something that can actually make you happier, because it's not a thing that you worry about quite so much. I love there's a book on Swedish death cleaning. And the Swedish death cleaning is to clean your house as if you had just, as if you had just died and your relatives were going to walk in and have to be but it has a kind of memento mori, reminding yourself that you're going to die, and getting your house clean. It's got all sorts of things in there to make you happy. But I just love the idea of Swedish death cleaning. And you can listen to Swedish death metal at the same time. That might be so I think they're connected. I think thinking about death is often, and it's often the thinking that we're going to live forever is the thing that puts us off doing the things that we want and need to do. Right? Yeah.
Yes, back. Sorry, Bill, you're next.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Do you think our society puts too much emphasis on focusing on like own happiness?
Yeah, for sure. And I think insofar, whatever I think is valuable in life, I should care about that in other people's lives as well as my own. So I should not just think about, if I've got a certain amount of resources, and I think about how I'm going to distribute those resources. Do I give them all to having me have the best life possible, or do I think about the lives of others as well? I think you ought to think about the lives of others as well, and I think most of us think that. You don't have to be a utilitarian or kind of a person who thinks you're going to maximize the good of everybody to think that you should care about other people. And so when you're thinking about well-being, you're concerned not just with your own well-being, but the well-being of others as well. I mean, often the examples I give are examples about thinking about your own life. But you could equally well say, I'm setting out the lives, thinking about how the lives of this group of people should go, and I'm the person in charge, and I could determine that they all live 70 years really happy, or like 110 with the last, you think about how you would distribute. When we're asking those questions kind of are about the direction we want our society to go in, right? Do we work more on, if we've got resources to distribute, do we care more about improving the quality of life or about lengthening the lifespan? That's a practical import of that philosophical question I asked. And it's not just about my life, it's about the lives of all of us. So yeah.
Sure.
I have one more question. So when you spoke about the relationships, that how women are more in that area, they have more well-being, they're happier because of they have relationships, and their focus is that, whether it's by their nature or by nurture.
Right.
So was that inclusive of also relating to themselves? Was it like in relationship, also developing a relationship, or is that expressed through their relationship to others?
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I was thinking in terms of lots of feminists think that good relationships are among the most important things in your life. Probably lots of feminists have views about self-regarding attitudes that we should have and self-respect, and I think you could think about those in relational terms. The relationship, how seriously, how well you treat yourself.
Would that be considered selfish?
No, because I think lots of people, there's this whole thing that women will sometimes say about taking care of themselves so that they can take care of their families, like the old put your air mask on first thing. And I think that's true, but I also think take care of yourself because you matter too, not just so you'll be a better caregiver, right? It's not just important. We'll sometimes use that excuse. I don't mean excuse, but we'll sometimes tell that kind of story. But it's not the only reason. I was always shocked. I had women on this is my sporting story. I had women on my soccer team who used to sneak out to soccer. Like, they would put their soccer stuff in the trunk of the car and then say they were going to get groceries and stopping off like to visit a sick friend. I said, you're not having an affair, you're playing soccer. Why do I have to lie? Don't take a picture of me playing because you can't post it on Facebook, I'm not at soccer. What? Right? And so I realized I had a very different sort of marriage than they had. And realized that, wow, even women I know who are educated and working lead some pretty constrained lives if they have to lie about going to soccer. And they should play soccer not just because, they would say, well, I've got to come anyway, otherwise I'm going to kill the kids. No, you should come anyway because it's fun, not because if you don't play soccer, you're going to kill your children. A, you're not false, you're not going to kill your children, I know you. And B, you should go because it's good for you, not because it's better for the kids. Don't be ridiculous. So, yeah.
So is that a factor in creating the gap that you mentioned earlier between
there's lots of, I think there's lots of places where, and lots of reasons why the gap occurs. There are women who are ashamed of their bodies, and so Tracy and I always get all teary when we think about this, because we have women who only jog at night, when it's like icy and dangerous and scary and not safe, because they don't want anyone to see them running because they don't look like they have runners' bodies. I mean, you're running, you have a runner's body. Stop, end of story. Like, run in daylight, it's safer. You're not going to fall, and it's safer for all sorts of good reasons that it's safer. Or in England, there was a big story that broke a few years ago about women purchasing and using backyard sheds and putting the treadmills in backyard sheds so that nobody could see them run on a treadmill because they were too embarrassed to go to a gym and run in a treadmill. They would rather run in the dark in a shed in their backyard. But this is really, really, really sad. And these are women, again, who are, it's not about having an athletic career, right? It's about having some physical movement in your life. And the barriers are there's lots of barriers. Other questions?
Have I overlooked anybody? Any more questions? I have some for you, but I'll follow
save them
up.
for
I'll save them
later.
for follow-up. Social constructions of the good and the Vikings and all that sort of stuff. So please join me in thanking Professor Brennan.